Thank you for having me to VITROMED, and thanks for coming. And we can come a little bit closer, right? We don't have to stay so far away, so I don't have to yell in this microphone. Um, as you see on my title, so I want to give you a short uptake on egg freezing and blastocyst freezing, and how we can minimize the time, labor, the stress to the oocytes as well as embryos. And my talk is, in two parts. It is the blastocyst first, what we already do in a clinical setting. We have already more than 3,000 transfers. We do fast warming. And the second part is, I still have to remind you research, but there is also more talks like tomorrow in the afternoon. They moved already on in a clinical setting. This is an egg bank who will show you this protocol and how the eggs fertilized, how the eggs developed, how is the blastocyst formation, and how is the rate of euploid embryos. Everything you can read what I tell you in RBM Online. It's published recently, I think in May and June. So, there is a dogma in biology, in cryobiology. When you thaw embryos, you have to do it in a stepwise way, right? That's a fundamental principle to prevent osmotic stress to the oocytes and embryos, and to make sure they survive. And the theory behind this approach is that you gradually dilute the cryoprotectant and rehydrate the oocytes and the embryos, and in doing so minimize the damage to the cells. That's right. And the entire procedure, when you ever froze oocytes or embryos, especially oocytes, it's time consuming and it's also labor intensive. So if we can achieve a 90 to 100% survival with one step, that would be awesome. And we really would kick asses to the dogma of cryobiology. And the idea behind, when you look at the development of IVF, that will be the same for Europe and India. We will have an increase in IVF cycles in the next 10 years. US is like a prediction of a tenfold. That means with having more IVF cycles, we will have more oocytes to freeze. We have more embryos from biopsies or non-biopsies, whatever is allowed in your country. So we will freeze forever. We will not have a decrease in freezing procedures. So it makes sense, when we look after 10, 15, 20 years of doing vitrification, that we make sure the protocols are fitting in our days and, are appropriated in the time we need for, in the solutions we need for, so that we make sure we are efficient, but also don't compromise our success in terms of survival and in terms of embryos and their potential to implant. So that is just an example here, how we vitrified blastocysts for quite a decade. It took us 9 minutes. If it's hard for you to read, so we took like 8 minutes in ES, and then we did 1 minute in VS. Everyone is familiar with the terms ES, VS. And so it took us 9 minutes. Now we cut it down to 5. We do 4 minutes in ES and 1 minute in VS. And we freeze at room temperature, right? So if you come down from 9 to 5 minutes, that's about 45 minutes, 45% in time saving. It is even more dramatic what we save on time when we come to the warming, right? So, as you see, we did 11 minutes before when we warmed the blastocysts, and now we do 1 minute, right? So we plunge them in 1 minute in TS, and then they go right into transfer media. So make a calculation here, we have over 90% in saving the time.
Got it.
So this is like the setup for the dish when we vitrify. So we have 2 drops of ES, a smaller one, a bigger one. The smaller one is just for rinsing the blastocysts out of the culture medium. Then we put them on top of the first drop of ES, and we keep them there for 4 minutes. Everything at room temperature, right? And then after the 4 minutes, we go through 2 drops of VS in a minute, This is a well-established time. You should not necessarily reduce this time, but you don't have to also extend it. So 1 minute or 90 seconds, it's okay. And then we load them on a carrier and plunge them. We use, for more than 20 years, a closed system. We use HSV, where we load embryos, seal it, and then plunge it. And that's actually the quite simple step of warming. There is also one drop only of 400 microliter. And this warming happens, of course, at 37 degrees. You have to make sure, your drop has this temperature. So it's a good advice to keep solutions overnight. So when you are having your warming, you're thawing in the morning, your media is ready to use, right? So TS, 400 microliter, you take them from your carrier, plunge your carrier, and then you keep them for a minute, and then you can go in your transfer dish. We thaw usually 2-3 hours before, just because of our procedures. We do retrievals first, and then we do the thaws, the transfers. So by usually 2-3 hours in the culture medium until transfer. We're using for the transfer Sage blastocyst media. It's a remnant of the sequential media, as Rolf pointed out. It was an early opportunity, to culture embryos in 2 different media. That's now over because we use a single-step media, but we keep the Sage media blastocyst that is exclusively prepared for day 5 embryos. And we use this media with 20% protein. If you don't have 20, and I see all your eyes, you don't have 20%, it works with 10% too.
Good.
That's our result so far. I updated that at least before I just boarded an airplane on Saturday. So we have close to 3,000 FETs. And you see, it's just a positive beta, right? But you see that you start with over 70% for every patient population. I'm sure you have the same system we have in the United States. You put your patient in different age groups, under 35, 35 to 37, 38 to 40, and then over 40. And you see, we have consistently over 70%. There is a small drop, but still, I think a good positive beta for patients over 40 with 65%. But more important is my little table. I put it to the right of my picture. This is real data. It's ongoing pregnancy and also live birth. And you see we have a live birth, or we have an ongoing pregnancy of 50% with a live birth of 51.6%. That is based on so far 899 transfers. So we have more than close to 400 babies born. So to summarize this part on the blastocyst, what does it bring to you if you move on to this one single step? It definitely will make your labor techniques for warming simpler. There is no question. If you ever do it and offer it to your team, they don't like to go back. And it will reduce the unnecessary time blastocysts out of the incubator exposed to unphysiological temperatures. You can imagine, before we did 11 minutes at room temperature, now we are only 1 minute. So this is a big advantage if we minimize the time outside the incubator, but also prevents ROS creation, and ROS can also compromise embryo development. And secondly, I also tried lower sucrose, 0.5 or even 0.25 molar works as well. And you don't have to stick with 20% for your transfer medium if you don't have an opportunity because of it's not available for you. You can also culture in 10% until transfer. And finally, short dehydration and short rehydration. And that's really the step what we're doing here. We're cutting down the time by doing a shorter rehydration and dehydration. Is easy to implement in your daily routine and standardize your blastocyst cryoversion procedure, and its outcome even more successful. The one-step warming protocol is superior to the multi-step procedure in terms of pregnancy outcome, and it's supporting an optimized workflow by reducing the labor to over 90%, and as well as it's cost effective. You need less solutions and less dishes. So the second part is about oocytes, and you see, I put a couple of things always on LinkedIn. There's a huge interest in the oocytes. Even we vitrify oocytes for more than 20 years. We started vitrifying oocytes in 2004. But you see, based on the comments and its impressions, there is still somehow a demand on this procedure, and people are still looking for more information and more knowledge. And oocyte vitrification is today an important part of every IVF procedure, right? There's a couple of reasons why we freeze oocytes. First, if no sperm available on day of egg retrieval, obviously. Then for poor responder, you do multiple cycles to support an increase in the oocytes you can accumulate for the patient. Egg donation, obviously. Egg donation is more convenient. It makes intended parents independent in their decision, give them more flexibility, and it's also time saving. You don't have to synchronize the donor and the intended parents. And you can get a donor from an egg bank in San Francisco, even if you live in Chicago. You don't have to go to San Francisco. So it's very convenient. And of course, fertility preservation in cancer patients, right? We do that too. And age-related fertility loss, social freezing, or however you want to call it. We live in a time where people push, their parenthood to the limit beyond 40. And as you know, when you work in that field long enough, it's difficult to make patients over 40 successful pregnant with their own eggs. And then premature ovarian failure. So there's a couple of reasons why we will keep freezing oocytes. And this is just a couple of numbers from us since 2004. ASRM, as Escher, they considered egg freezing for a long time experimental. And until 2012 and 13, they took this label off. And since then, it's a well-accepted procedure in every IVF treatment. And you see, after ASRM took that label off, we had an increase in cycles, and every year we have more patients seeking to freeze their oocytes. So there will be a huge demand. And again, it is important to make sure our protocol is sufficient. And I would assume that most of you froze eggs or still freezing eggs. And you see on the top, that's how we freeze the eggs. We expose the oocytes 15 minutes to the ES solution, and one after 1 minute or so, we go in the liquid nitrogen. So a total of 60. Some people do 10 minutes, that's fine too, and then you plunge it. But anyway, my protocol, and I have to remind you, it's still research, but when you come home, try it out with material you usually discard, unfertilized oocytes or immature oocytes. Make sure you have, on your patient's consent, a signed signature. You can this material for research. So I do it now in 1 minute in ES and 1 minute in VS. That would be a huge time saver. And again, it would be very important for oocytes not to being out forever at room temperature, like 15 minutes. So instead only of 2 minutes, right? Great. And my warming, when we warm oocytes, it's like 8 minutes now, 9 minutes total, the old protocol. So 1 minute in TS, now 37 degrees, right? Then 3 minutes in ES, 5 minutes in WS, and another minute in WS to rinse them. And then you go in your culture dish and wait like for the next 2-3 hours for ICSI. And my protocol is now not TS, it starts with DS. So half of the concentration, 0.5 molar, instead of 1 molar. TS is 1 molar, right? And I keep them for 1 minute. And then the remaining second minute, I go through 2 wash drops of WS. And that's a procedure of thawing eggs. That would be about 80% of time saving. And so there is a way to look into oocytes and how they change their volume. So I just want to show you there is a complicated formula. How you can consider the volume. And this is really an important part when you expose the solutions for dehydration, how they change their volume. Are you all good to understand me? Right. Okay. So perfect. And so I made some calculations just to show you, how it looks like when we do that long protocol, right? 15 minutes in ES and 1 minute in VS. And what you see, after the first minute, the oocytes will have a volume reduction of about 60%. So you have a remaining volume of 40%. If you wait like 6-10 minutes, it will regain volume. Everyone knows this, right? When you freeze oocytes. And when you come to the 10 minutes, the volume has reached its maximum. So you will be at 80%. Even you stay for 5 minutes. That's what I mentioned before. You can actually go after 10 minutes in the VS, right? But you see there is no volume change until we go in VS, right? And why is this? Because VS has twice more percentage of cryoprotectant than ES. How much is in ES percentage? Does anyone know? How much percentage of cryoprotectant? 7.5 of ES, 7.5 of DS. Makes 15%, right? And the VS has 15 of each. You have to add it up, so you have 30%. So that's why you get another volume reduction, and again, about down to 40%, right? So remember this slide. And when you look at my protocol, first of all, why I did it study? There was a publication by a group from Spain, and they figured out, right, in 2019, in a scientific research report, oocyte osmotic behavior indicates that the dehydration upon exposure to the cryoprotectant occurs within 60 seconds. Just let it set, right? Settle. 60 seconds. So 1 minute. That means that prolonging the exposure to the cryoprotectant does not improve the cytosolic class formating tendency and could be prevented. After 2 minutes of exposure to the cryoprotectant, the critical intracellular solute concentration necessary for successful vitrification is obtained. So when I show you, I know my protocol. If you see it's 100%, when you put them on the ES on top, let them sink. It takes them 30 seconds. You see, you also get about 60% volume reduction. Not entirely, but it goes down to 57%. And then when I expose it to the VS after 1 minute ES, it goes down again to 40. And you remember the last picture I showed you from the long protocol, the oocyte also after 60 minutes has 40% of volume left. And the same I have here with 2 minutes, right? And when you see here my two curves, right? You see here, it doesn't show you the PowerPoint, but you see on top, know how the volume regains volume. And then on the end, when we go in VS, there's 40%. And the same volume reduction I will achieve after 2 minutes, right? But it's important. We need that volume reduction because we have to get rid of water. But with 2 minutes, you achieve the same endpoint that you would achieve with 16 minutes, right? So there is no need for 16 minutes. And so I started my research on oocytes with the blastocysts in May 22. This is my office tour. It shows you always my progress. It's nice to document this. I need actually 4 or 5 more tours of this because I have so many pictures. But this is just an example, how I keep track of my stuff, besides, of course, a protocol. And every time, you have an idea about research, you have to ask you a couple of questions, right? I don't bring them up, but of course, I had a bunch of questions, up to 10. Every time, as long as I was looking into this, I got more questions. And it's important to have this as a guideline so that you know your direction where to go. And so I was coming up with that protocol. It is now quite simple. So I have 1 drop of VS, and I just take them out of the culture, rinse them briefly there, and then I put them on top of the first ES drop. As you see, my drops are a little bit bigger. So first drop is 100, and the ES is 200 microliter, right? It's very easy. I do it on a lid of a 90 millimeter dish where you usually use for egg retrieval. And then, you put them on top of the 200 microliter, the egg will sink down. And I tell you, at least after 40 seconds, it reaches the bottom of the dish. And when the oocyte reaching the bottom of the dish, that oocyte is in equilibrium. That means there is no water extrusion anymore. Cryoprotectant everything is in balance. The intra and the outer cellular osmolarity is in an equilibrium. It's isotonic, right? And after 1 minute, you pick them up. I always take a little bit of the of the VS first. I load with VS, pick them up from the ES. There's no reason to bring ES in the VS. Put them on the first drop, rinse them quickly, and the remaining part of the 1 minute, I keep them in the second drop. I don't steer them, I don't move them, I just keep them on the bottom of the dish. After 1 minute, I load them, plunge them, and be done. Good. So warming is also simple, but keep in mind, it's not TS. I start with TS, right? And you have to think about why we use TS. Everyone maybe knows when we have our final step in VS, I mentioned it's 30% of cryoprotectant, and it contains 0.5 molar sucrose, right? So why we want to go in 1 molar sucrose, right? What happens when you go into 1 molar, right? Your eggs rising up to the surface, they get that extreme ghost stage, where sometimes if you don't catch them, hard to find. And when you get nervous, where are my eggs? Because you have only 1 minute, right? In DS, we're sitting on the carrier and beg you to get picked up. And when you put them aside and wait for 1 minute, there is no ghost, there is nothing. And when they rise, expand, and when I take them in my first drop of VS, I always carry, in that case, sucrose with me. So I make a little bit of sandwich, right? So I take sucrose with me in the first VS. After 30 seconds, I take them from this first VS drop in my second drop with now only VS. And after 2 minutes total time, I'm done in thawing eggs. And when it works, are the data right here. So I always like to compare things, and now it is not to to hurt anyone or companies. It's also good for you guys, because you might don't have even Irvine or don't have VitroLife, right? You might use Sage or Kirasato, our friends over there. So it is good for all of us to know, and I can conclude that with 100% security, all this media are interchangeable. So when you get media or embryos from me, they will be on Irvine because we use Irvine, right? If you have VitroLife, you can use VitroLife for warming. If you have Sage, you use Sage for warming. You can even use Kirasato for warming because they all have the same purpose and they will do the same thing, right? I did enough data. So, but you see here, I used oocytes. They usually get discarded, right? GVs, there is no use for any patients. Metaphase 1, they don't fertilize. So you see how their survival is very consistent, regardless of the media type, right? But, for the GVs, there's this one thing, or for the M1, it's this one thing that will survive, right? And we don't really know what does it mean. Surviving by just not dead. But do they have a potential to move on? For example, the GV, do they have that power to resume their meiotic activity, disappear the GV, moving on to a metaphase 1, and even moving on to a metaphase 2 by reducing their chromosome from diploid to haploid, right? And you see here, I have 2 control groups, 1 control group and 1 freezing group. The first one are the 700 I vitrified. And then when you follow my number 111, you see how is their conversion to metaphase 1, how is the conversion to metaphase 2. And it definitely needs 24 hours and sometimes 48. But you will be surprised, GVs can make it in 24 hours to metaphase 2 oocytes, right? And then I have my control where I kept them just overnight, right? We retrieved on Monday GVs and I kept them until Tuesday. And when I compare how is their conversion without being vitrified to metaphase and metaphase 2. And if you look at the number, I have not to go through this table, you see the numbers are very comparable, right? For example, conversion from vitrified ones is like 91%, and from the fresh is 89%. So there is no significant difference. And when you see the conversion to metaphase 2, it's about 58, 60%. So it's very comparable, right? That means good for us. This 2-minute freezing and warming does not compromise the oocytes at that stage in moving on in their embryo development. This is a nice study done by Kirasato, and it was actually presented at the Alpha meeting in Lisbon. And so they did the protocol A was the protocol I just showed you before, like 10 minutes ES and 1 minute VS. And then they had another protocol B, they did 1 minute ES, 1 minute VS. You see some similarities to my protocol, right? And you see, they didn't see a difference in survival immediately after warming, but they saw a difference, a significant survival in the after 3 hours. And you see 83 with the long protocol, right? And I think there is the impact of this long time outside the incubator. And when you see actually the short protocol, brings you after 3 hours a significant higher survival of these vitrified warm oocytes with the shorter protocol. I did also metaphase 2. I did also abnormal fertilized zygotes and cleavage stage embryos from abnormal fertilized zygotes. And you see here, again, I compared Vitrolife Irvine. There is that's X, they, for example, did not get injected, they converted next day, or they were not fertilized. So material we also would discard, and they're not necessarily good quality. So I can tell you, if they survive and you have excellent oocyte quality, even from donors or from autologous patients, they will do fine. And C is consistent over 90%, right? And then you see also the zygotes, easy to handle for the zygotes. So it's always literally 100% survival. They are easy to vitrify, and significant stage embryos as well. And some pictures here, just to be fair, there's some pictures with Vitrolife and some with Irvine, and you see these oocytes look great. If I would show you this picture, you wouldn't believe they were cryopreserved, vitrified, right? In 2 minutes, vitrified, and 2 minutes warming, so 4 minutes instead of a total of 27. This is just what I recently did. I vitrified 43 GVs, right? And I did something very extreme. So I used a total of 5 cryologs for these 43 oocytes, because I put like 9 on 2 and 8 on 3. And so you would assume, oh my God, this is crazy. It's a lot of volume. But this is a lot of volume. I'm sure you're all skilled enough to put 9 oocytes on a carrier. Your volume will be still smaller than a microliter. I would even say less than 0.5. But the point is, they all survive, right? I had in the 43, I think I had 2 dead, so 41 survived. And they all converted. And this is an example of 23 metaphase 2. I loaded, and you see my time. So I vitrified them in about 5 minutes and 30 seconds. It's my iPhone, right? And then I did thawing in about close to 4 minutes of 23 oocytes by loading this X in a higher number, right? But I just want to show you what we all believe we have to freeze only 2 or 4 to keep the volume. You can be more efficient, and you don't compromise anything by going with a bigger number, right? And no one else in your clinic is asking for thawing 2 oocytes. No one else. That's different with embryos, right? We always freeze 1 embryo per stick, especially, of course, genetic tested embryos. And, so I did so far with research, but I want to show you also some other things, data from someone else, from studies from Japan on mouse embryos. And for example, here, they did a control. They did a conventional vitrification and the ultra fast. And the survival was comparable. And you see the protocol. The conventional, they did 10 minutes and 1 minute. And then they did 1 minute and 1 minute for the short protocol, right? And then they looked also in other stuff. They looked in the mitochondria. They looked in the endoplasmatic reticulum. And they looked in a couple of things, how the intracellular structure might be compromised with short protocol. But I can tell you, whatever they looked into it, like the aggregation of mitochondria, that is very important for cell activity and membrane activity, isotol, they found everything what they're looking for was in favor of the fast freezing compared to the traditional freezing. You can read that here, right? The only thing that was comparable was that the DNA, the chromosome, was not affected by the long freezing compared with the short freezing. And I mean, that's a good thing, because the eggs we mostly froze on a long way are still genetically okay. That was not compromised. The spindle or the chromosome alignment. And then there is a study, and I would encourage you to go tomorrow. I think he talks at 2 o'clock. This is a 2-minute protocol from a donor egg bank. And you see here, we stayed already like 4 months ago. I'm sure he updated it. You see there's an excellent survival. There is an excellent fertilization. It is, I have to look, the fertilization was 92%, the cleavage about 90%, blastocyst formation over 57%, that's excellent. And more important, these blastocysts were over 60% euploid. So, and then here also, I showed you on the right, I have some graphs of morphology data and data on metabolomics. I'm sorry. He didn't share it with me because he told me I will talk at Escher, and I said it's fine. So we should go tomorrow at 2 o'clock to his talk, and you will get more information on his way how to freeze these eggs in a fast way, and the data I cannot provide you, but he can. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope you now go home and know what to do.